I wish I could tell you that walking into my brother's wedding felt like stepping into a warm embrace, but that would be a lie. From the moment I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the ballroom, I knew what was waiting for me. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't come from peace, but from pointed indifference. Click, click, click. My heels tapped against the marble floor, echoing into a room filled with faces that turned away almost in unison. Not one smile, not one wave, just whispers, clinking glasses, and the sharp awareness that my presence didn't matter here. And yet, like a fool, I still held on to a thread of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe my family would remember that I wasn't some shadow they could shove into the corner. Emily, I imagined my mother's voice calling. Over here, sweetheart. But of course that didn't happen. Instead, my aunt glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly, then bent her head back into her conversation like I was a passing waitress. My cousin gave me a tight smile, the kind you reserve for strangers in an elevator, then drowned herself in wine. It wasn't hostility. It was worse. It was indifference. I made my way toward the front, pretending I belonged in this curated picture of perfection. Orchids hung delicately from golden arches. Crystal bowls held floating candles. Everything screamed elegance and control, the exact image David and Sophia wanted to project. I scanned the seating chart, a massive board with calligraphed names arranged neatly under table numbers. David and Sophia at table 1, of course. My parents at table 2. Bridal party at table 3. On and on the names went: neighbors, family friends, teachers from long ago. Everyone had a place. Except me. My name wasn't there. I checked again. And again. Maybe it was a mistake, I thought. Maybe my card slipped. Maybe someone forgot to pin it. I forced a smile and approached the wedding planner, a young woman with a clipboard, and that practiced "everything is perfect" smile. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't see my name on the chart. Could there be a mistake?" She glanced down, frowned, then pasted her professional cheer back on. "Oh yes, Miss Emily. Table 14. Table 14. Yes, toward the back, near the kitchen. There were some late changes. Near the kitchen, of course." I nodded, holding my composure as though it didn't matter. But when I turned and walked toward the back, the weight of it settled in my chest. Table 14 was tucked against the swinging kitchen doors. Every time they opened, the smell of roasted lamb and garlic rushed out. The tablecloth was wrinkled. The silverware didn't match. And worst of all, 2 catering staff were already seated there on break, chatting softly. As I pulled out a chair, one of them scrambled up, embarrassed. I opened my mouth to tell him it was fine, that he didn't have to move, when her voice cut through the room. "She doesn't run anything. Let her eat with the staff." Sophia's voice was cold, sharp, and loud enough for heads to turn. I froze. Not because her words surprised me, but because they didn't. I turned slowly. There she was, Sophia, standing tall, with her arm linked through David's. Around them, friends in polished dresses and suits smirked, watching me like I was entertainment. My mother was nearby, pretending to fuss with a flower arrangement. My father shoved his hands into his pockets, looking at the dance floor. And David, my brother, the man I had come to support, said nothing. Not a word. That silence cut deeper than Sophia's insult. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I just stood there, hands resting lightly on the back of the chair, my smile frozen in place. Inside, the storm raged. Are you kidding me? After everything I've done, after all the nights I saved this family's company from collapse, you'll let her humiliate me in front of everyone and you'll just stand there. But outside, I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I simply sat down. The clink of silverware carried from the other tables, the hum of laughter rolling through the ballroom. And there I was, tucked away, like some embarrassing secret breathing in steam from the kitchen, trying not to choke on the bitter taste of betrayal. "Does it hurt?" I whispered to myself, tracing the edge of my napkin. Of course it does. I tried to sip the water in front of me, but even that tasted metallic like shame. My thoughts raced. If I stand up and walk out right now, they'll call me dramatic. If I argue, I'll be painted as jealous. If I stay, I'm the joke at the back of the room. It was a trap, every choice another way to confirm the role they'd written for me. But here's the thing, they had forgotten who I really was. I wasn't the little sister fetching coffee. I wasn't some prop to decorate their perfect picture. I wasn't powerless, and deep down, I knew it. As the music swelled and the toasts began, I let their laughter wash over me, engraving every insult into memory. Every dismissal, every stolen credit, every time they pretended not to hear me. My mother's silence, my father's indifference, my brother's betrayal, and now Sophia's perfectly calculated humiliation. I sat up straighter, folded my hands in my lap, and whispered, only for myself, "They think I belong in the kitchen. Let them." A slow smile tugged at my lips, because the moment they handed me this seat, they gave me permission to burn down the entire table. This was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. If you've ever been invisible in your own family, you'll understand what I'm about to say. Being unseen isn't loud, it's quiet. It's the joke you're not included in the story retold at dinner that leaves out your part, the look your parents give your brother that they never give you. It's the 1,000 tiny ways you learn day after day that your presence is optional. That was my childhood. David, my older brother, was born 2 years before me. From the very beginning, he was the one. My parents lit up when he entered the room. He was bold, loud, charming, the type of child who could spill orange juice on the carpet and still make everyone laugh. And me, I was the quiet one. Not because I was shy, but because I learned early that my words didn't carry weight. I remember once I was 8, sitting at the dinner table carefully explaining an idea I had for a lemonade stand. Not just a stand, but a system where kids on the block could sell for me and split the profit. I was so proud of that idea. Halfway through, my mother interrupted David. "Darling, tell us about your soccer game." Just like that, my words evaporated. Everyone leaned in to listen to David. I sat back staring at the mashed potatoes on my plate, realizing something important. Some tables aren't set for you. At school, I excelled quietly, grades, projects, small wins. But at home, it was David's trophies that lined the shelves. David's name that was celebrated in holiday letters. It wasn't anger that grew inside me, it was understanding. An understanding that if I wanted recognition, I'd have to work twice as hard for half as much. And so I did. I buried myself in books and numbers, in details David never cared about. I became the one who noticed the cracks, the electric bill creeping too high, the way Dad's business accounts didn't quite line up the gaps between promise and reality. But no one wanted to hear that from me. When my father started Atlas, his eyes sparkled with ambition. He gave David a desk on day 1, a title, and even a stack of shiny business cards. I was still in college, balancing part-time jobs and night classes. "Can I help with the accounting software?" I asked once. "Or maybe investor pitches, I'm good with numbers." "We'll call you when we need you," Dad said. They didn't call. Not for years. And then the market crashed. Atlas teetered on the edge of collapse. I still remember the night Dad called me voice tight, asking if I could take a quick look at the books. That was his way of admitting panic. When I opened the files, my stomach dropped. Duplicate vendors, bleeding money, reporting trails so sloppy, they could have been deliberate unpaid invoices stacked like a house of cards. David was handling it, but his idea of handling was pacing the office and shouting into phones. I worked nights crunching numbers, creating emergency audits, reaching out to investors I had built quiet relationships with. Not flashy people, the steady ones. The ones who believed in foundation over firework displays. I convinced them Atlas had a future. I sold them on possibility, on strategy, on discipline. And it worked. Atlas survived. When the dust settled, David strutted into board meetings, telling stories of how he had saved the company. My father clapped him on the back. My mother beamed with pride. Me, I wasn't even invited into the room. I didn't explode. I didn't slam doors or scream about fairness. That's not power, that's noise. And I had already learned power is quiet. So I waited. Family dinners became their own theater. David arriving late, retelling the same half-true stories, soaking up laughter. I tried once to bring up an idea I'd been developing, an incubator for small nonprofits that could actually sustain themselves financially. Mom, Dad, I've been researching this. David, Mom cut in. How was your golf tournament? My words dissolved again. My father passed the salt. David cracked a joke about my old car, and the whole table erupted in laughter. I smiled tightly, biting down the ache. Some tables aren't set for you, I reminded myself. But what I didn't say out loud was, then I'll build my own. When Dad died, I thought maybe things would change. Grief has a way of reshaping priorities. I thought maybe now they'll finally see me. But grief only amplified the old patterns. David positioned himself as the man of the family. The board approved him as CEO without hesitation. My title didn't change. My role didn't change. But my presence faded even further. Decisions were made in rooms I wasn't invited into. Meetings scheduled without me. The few who remembered how close Atlas had come to collapse, the ones who had watched me drag it back from the brink, offered me soft thank yous in hallways. Footnotes, not recognition. It hurt, yes, but more than that, it clarified. Power wasn't about being at the head of the table. It was about knowing when to sit silently and when to strike. And I already knew my time was coming. Then came the announcement David was engaged. His face plastered on financial media sites, arm around Sophia, a woman whose smile was as polished as a magazine cover. At first, I stayed silent. If he wanted to marry into money, fine. His choice. But then I got a call. A longtime legal advisor, someone who owed me a favor. He told me about a clause hidden in the merger contract. Every strategic growth plan at Atlas had to be signed off not just by the CEO, but also by its governing co-founder. That was me, the invisible sister, the ghost behind the curtain. For the first time, I saw clearly. They had built their empire on my silence, but silence was not surrender. I had been patient, not powerless. And patience, I knew, cuts both ways. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, they don't see you? Fine. They don't hear you? Fine. But they will feel you. One day, your silence will be louder than all their applause. That day was closer than they thought. There's a particular kind of betrayal that doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It doesn't scream or slam a door. It arrives quietly in black and white text, polite font, as though treachery dressed itself up in business casual. For me, it began with an email. Subject: Leadership Restructure. I almost deleted it without reading. My inbox was flooded after weeks of crisis control. Investors demanding updates, vendors begging for payment, auditors chasing signatures. I was living on caffeine and adrenaline carrying the company on my back while everyone else pretended not to notice the cracks. But I clicked, and I read. Effective immediately, David Collins has been appointed Chief Executive Officer of Atlas Corporation. I froze. The words blurred for a moment, my eyes dry, my body still. I reread them. Once, twice, 3 times. Nowhere in that email was my name. Not in thanks, not in recognition, not even in the fine print. David Collins, my brother. The man who had panicked in boardrooms, who had stood frozen while I quietly built lifelines to save Atlas, was now king. And me, I wasn't even a footnote. That afternoon, I barged into the boardroom, the email still glowing on my phone. Why wasn't I told? My voice cracked across the room. The 12 board members looked up startled. They weren't expecting me. They never expected me. Finally, Mr. Aldridge cleared his throat. Emily, we thought it best for continuity. David has a stronger public presence. I stared at him. Continuity. Atlas was 15 days from collapse. Who convinced the investors to stay? Who ran the audits? Who cleaned up your mess? Uncomfortable silence, eyes darting, hands fidgeting. David leaned back in his chair, smiling that smile he always wore when he thought he'd won. No one's denying you worked hard, Emily. But CEO requires vision. Charisma. Charisma. That word again. I clenched my fists under the table. Charisma doesn't keep the lights on. Charisma doesn't pay salaries. Charisma doesn't save companies from the brink. But I could see it in their faces. The decision was carved in stone before I ever walked into the room. The whispers came soon after. Soft voices in hallways, quick glances over shoulders. I know you saved us. You deserved that title. If it were up to me, always whispered, always hidden. What good are whispered truths when lies are shouted from stages I didn't want pity? I wanted acknowledgement, respect, and I wasn't going to get it here. Meetings went on without me. Contracts signed without my review. My name erased from slide decks, from memos, from conversations. I was still there, but invisible. The ghost in the building I had rebuilt with my bare hands. Sometimes I wondered if firing me would have been kinder. Instead, they kept me like a stain they couldn't scrub out, awkward, unwanted, but tolerated. At night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, whispering to myself, "You gave them back their empire, and they crowned him instead. You saved them, and they left you behind." But another voice followed, steady and cold. Patience. They think they buried you, but you've been planting seeds. One afternoon, Sophia swept into the office. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect calculation. "Emily," she cooed. "You must be so proud of David, CEO. What an achievement." I wanted to laugh, proud of him. The truth itched on my tongue. He wouldn't be CEO without me. Instead, I stayed silent, letting the weight of that silence settle between us. Her smile flickered. Just for a second. And in that flicker, I knew she understood. Not long after my mother invited me to dinner. She wanted to celebrate David's new role. The table was full, everyone laughing, glasses clinking. David basked in the glow. My mother's eyes shone. I lifted my fork, chewing mechanically, my mind replaying every night I had stayed up saving this family's company, every time they had ignored me, every time my words were cut off mid-sentence. My mother turned to me at one point. "You're so quiet, Emily. Quiet, always quiet." I wanted to scream, "I'm quiet because you never listened. I'm quiet because you never cared." Instead, I smiled. Some people mistake silence for weakness. No one noticed. No one cared. The laughter rolled on, but inside me, something hardened into stone. At a glittering fundraiser, I ran into Warren Fairchild, one of the investors I had saved. "Emily," he said quietly, "don't think I don't know who kept Atlas alive. That was you." My throat tightened. Then why? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than words' power bows to charisma, not competence. Weeks later, I received an email forwarded by mistake. A single line from Sophia to David: "Once Emily signs, she's done. We won't need her anymore." I read it again. And again. My hands shook not from fear, but from recognition. So this was the plan. Use me, drain me, then discard me. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I wouldn't fight. They thought wrong. That night, I made my choice. I would stop waiting for their table. I would build my own. It started small. A Delaware LLC with a quiet name, a trust managed by a lawyer who didn't like cameras, a few allies willing to put their names where mine would raise questions. Small moves, quiet moves, invisible moves. And with every move, I smiled. Because David had no idea. Sophia had no idea. And when the moment came, they would realize the sister they thought they buried had been building an empire right under their noses. Betrayal doesn't just wound you once. It keeps cutting little by little until you're raw enough that even silence feels like a blade. By the time I moved into the second phase of my plan, I wasn't just hurt. I was steel. It was a Tuesday morning when David called me into his office. His new office. The one with the floor-to-ceiling windows, the leather chairs, the desk polished to a shine. "Emily," he said, gesturing for me to sit. His tone was syrupy sweet, the way you talk to someone you think you've already beaten. I stayed standing. He sighed. "Look, I know you've been tense about the restructure. But you have to understand I was born for this. Dad always said, 'Don't you dare,'" I snapped. "Don't you dare use Dad's words to justify stealing what you didn't earn." His jaw tightened. "I didn't steal anything. The board chose me. They chose a mascot," I said coldly. "Not a leader." He leaned forward, voice sharp now. "You think investors want you on stage. You think employees rally behind spreadsheets. They follow me, Emily. I'm the face, your background." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so small-minded. "You've mistaken visibility for power," I told him. "One day, you'll learn the difference." That night, I sat at my kitchen table with stacks of papers spread before me. LLC documents, vendor contracts, quiet investments I'd made years ago that had started to bear fruit. Every signature I wrote felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. They think I'm background, then I'll be the foundation. They think I'm invisible, then I'll be the walls they never saw being built. And when the time comes, the house will already be mine. It was Sophia who slipped next. She always did love the sound of her own voice. We were at a charity luncheon, the kind where everyone's smile hides a knife. She leaned across the table, her diamond bracelet clinking against the glass. "Emily, darling," she purred. "I hope you're ready to sign off on the Fairchild merger. Once that's done, you'll finally be able to relax. The way she said relax made my skin crawl. I tilted my head. Relax or disappear. Her smile faltered for half a beat. Then she recovered, dazzling. But the crack was there, and I saw it. What they didn't know was that I'd been building more than paperwork. There was Marcus, the logistics startup founder who owed me for funding his survival during a brutal winter. His company now controlled a lane of distribution David desperately needed. There was Alondra, the fintech genius, who had designed a micro-lending model that actually worked. Atlas wanted her tech. I already had the contract. And there was Ravi, a compliance specialist no one in the big leagues paid attention to, until he figured out how to automate diligence without stripping humanity. Atlas was knocking on his door. He was answering mine. Piece by piece, I had stitched together a network. Quiet, strong, unshakable. The final straw came late one night. I was in the office long after everyone had gone home reviewing documents Sophia had pushed across my desk earlier that day. Buried deep in the fine print was a clause. Once the merger finalized, my signature would no longer be required for major decisions. I sat back, the fluorescent light buzzing above me, the city sprawling out the window. My chest felt tight, not from shock, but from clarity. So this is it. This is how they planned to erase me. One last drop of ink, and I'd be gone. I whispered into the empty room. Not a chance. The next morning, I found her in the lobby, dripping in designer silk, her smile sugary sweet. I read the documents, I said flatly. She blinked. And you're cleverer than I thought. Hiding the knife in plain sight. Her eyes narrowed. Emily, you're overthinking. No, I cut her off. I'm finally thinking exactly enough. For the first time since I'd known her, Sophia didn't have a comeback. Her mask cracked, and beneath it I saw calculation. Cold. Ruthless. Good. Now we understood each other. From then on, I stopped fighting for recognition. I stopped raising my voice in meetings. I stopped correcting lies. Outwardly, I played the role they wrote for me, the quiet sister tolerated, overlooked, irrelevant. But inside, I was stone. Every slight, every dismissal, every insult, they weren't wounds anymore. They were weapons I was sharpening. I whispered it nightly, like a prayer, like a promise. They think my silence means surrender. They don't know silence cuts both ways. Theirs wounded me. Mine will destroy them. The next months were a blur of small, careful moves. A property purchase here, a vendor contract there, each one tied invisibly to me. Atlas's big expansion, dependent on systems I already controlled. Atlas's new tech partners, bound by contracts with my entities. Atlas's future headquarters, sitting in a portfolio managed by someone who answered only to me. They laughed at me in boardrooms. They smirked at family dinners. And I smiled back. Because the joke wasn't on me, it was on them. One evening, sitting alone in my apartment, I looked out at the city lights and whispered, I was never meant to sit at their table. I was meant to build my own. The betrayal had been brutal, yes, but it had given me something more powerful than their approval. It had given me clarity, and with clarity comes power. So I waited, patient, silent, calculating. They thought they had already erased me, but what they couldn't see was that my hand was already on the lever, and when the time came to pull it, they would finally understand the sister they thought was invisible had been the one holding the Emmy. Some people build empires on stage with flashing lights and applause. Others build them in shadows, one quiet brick at a time. Mine was the second kind. The night I decided to build my own empire, it didn't feel like a revolution. It felt like survival. I sat at my kitchen table, a lamp buzzing overhead, papers spread out before me. Bank statements, contract drafts, legal forms. On one sheet, I scribbled the words, "New Foundation," in thick black ink. Not Atlas, not theirs. Mine. I wasn't thinking of revenge. Not yet. I was thinking of protection. If they wanted to erase me, I needed a place they couldn't touch. So I formed my first LLC in Delaware. A bland name chosen to be forgettable. Something that would never raise eyebrows in a boardroom. On the surface, just another shell company. But to me, it was a seed. I didn't need a crowd. I needed a handful of people who knew what it was like to be overlooked. Marcus was the first. His logistics startup had been circling the drain until I wrote a check no one else would. I didn't do it for charity. I did it because I saw his grit. "Emily," he said when I visited his warehouse, the smell of diesel thick in the air. "Why are you doing this? No one bets on companies like mine. I'm not no one," I told him. "And I don't bet. I build." His eyes lit up. From that day on, he was mine. Then there was Alondra, a fintech genius with a laugh that sounded more like a challenge than joy. She had designed a micro-lending model that kept single mothers from drowning in fees. Banks dismissed her. Investors mocked her. I signed her. "You're not like them," she told me over coffee, eyes sharp. "No," I said. "I'm the one they never see coming." And Ravi, quiet, meticulous Ravi. A compliance expert who knew more about regulatory loopholes than entire law firms. He'd been passed over for promotions so many times he'd stopped counting. "They don't listen to me," he admitted, once voice barely above a whisper. "I do," I said. That was enough. Piece by piece, I stitched them together. Marcus gave me control over distribution lanes Atlas didn't know they'd need yet. Alondra gave me the technology Atlas was already courting but couldn't secure. Ravi built systems so clean, so invisible, that no one realized half the industry was already leaning on him. None of it was flashy. None of it made headlines. But it was power. By day, I played my role at Atlas. The quiet sister sitting in meetings, tolerated but ignored. By night, I built. There were evenings when I'd leave the office-drained walk straight into my apartment and work until dawn on my hidden empire. My desk became a war zone of contracts, notes, diagrams, mapping out connections like a spiderweb. Some nights I'd pause, rub my temples, whisper to myself, "Are you insane? Are you really doing this?" And then I'd remember Sophia's email. "Once Emily signs, she's done." That was my answer. Family dinners became rehearsals for my silence. David would boast about Atlas's digital expansion. Sophia would beam like she'd invented success itself, and my mother would nod with pride. I'd sit there chewing slowly, nodding at the right times, eyes distant. Inside, I was laughing, because the very expansion David bragged about relied on vendors I already controlled. The tech Sophia flaunted over champagne glasses Alondra's under my contracts. They thought I was irrelevant. They didn't know they were bragging about my empire. Sometimes late at night, fear would creep in. What if they found out? What if one mistake unraveled everything? I'd pace my apartment, whispering to myself, "You're not ready. You're playing too big. They'll crush you." Then I'd stand in front of the mirror, stare into my own eyes, and answer, "They already tried to crush you. This is you standing back up." The real shift came one morning when I sat across from a potential investor. Not for Atlas, for me. He frowned at my proposal, flipping through the pages. "This is ambitious. Risky. Why should I trust you?" I leaned in steady. Because you don't know my name. And that's the point. While they're watching the spotlight, I'm building the stage. He smiled. All right, I'm in. That was when I knew I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was preparing to strike. Empires don't rise overnight. They grow in silence, watered by patience, and built on the bones of underestimation. Mine was no different. Marcus, Alondra, and Ravi were just the beginning. Soon, there was Layla, a data scientist, whose fraud detection model had been dismissed as too niche. Atlas didn't want her. I did. With her algorithms in place, my companies could spot vulnerabilities long before they made headlines. Then came Jonah, a property developer who specialized in undesirable buildings, old warehouses, forgotten lots, spaces no one else cared about. To David and Sophia, these were eyesores. To me, they were chess pieces. Jonah quietly shifted deeds into portfolios that I controlled. Each addition to the network was invisible. No flashy acquisitions, no press releases, just quiet signatures, dotted lines, sealed envelopes. Every deal tightened the web. By day, I wore the mask. I sat in Atlas meetings, ignored, overlooked, occasionally spoken over. David would point at slides he barely understood. Sophia would chime in with rehearsed polish, and I'd sit there scribbling notes no one asked me to take. I played the role so well that they forgot I could play another. By night, I was someone else entirely. The quiet sister became the architect. The ghost in the corner became the woman signing contracts under names they didn't recognize. Sometimes, I wondered if I was losing my mind living two lives like this. But then, I'd remember their laughter, their silence, their betrayal, and the doubt melted away. Sophia had a way of slipping into my orbit, testing the edges of my patience. At a gala one evening, she leaned close, her perfume sharp, her words sharper. "Emily, darling," she whispered, "don't you ever get tired of pretending I sipped my drink steady? Pretending that you matter here." Her smile was soft, cruel. "Atlas doesn't need you. David doesn't need you. You're an accessory." Inside, fury coiled like a snake. But outwardly, I only tilted my head. "Funny," I murmured. I was just about to say the same thing about you. Her smile froze. Just for a second, enough for me to see the crack. One by one, the silent victories piled up. Atlas announced a new distribution pilot. They didn't know Marcus's roots were mine. Atlas teased a fraud prevention upgrade. Layla's algorithms mine. Atlas signed a lease for their flagship property. Jonah's deed tucked safely in my portfolio. At family dinners, David boasted about these wins, puffing out his chest, soaking up applause. I raised my glass too, smiling, because every toast he made was really to me. Of course, there were nights when fear pressed in like smoke. What if the web unraveled? What if they traced the strings back to me? I'd pace my apartment whispering, "You're reckless. You're playing a game too big." Then I'd stop, grip the edge of my desk, and answer out loud, "No, they're reckless. They built a kingdom on illusions. I'm building on stone." David confronted me once in his office, the city skyline blazing behind him. "Emily," he said, frustration sharp, "I don't know what game you're playing, but I can feel it. Don't undermine me." I met his glare calmly. Why would I waste time undermining something already crumbling? His face flushed. "Atlas isn't crumbling." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Then why do you sound like you're trying to convince yourself he didn't answer?" He didn't have to. His silence told me everything. One evening, I stood in a nearly empty warehouse Jonah had just signed over to me. The air was cold, the concrete floor slick with dust. To anyone else, it was just an abandoned space. To me, it was proof. I ran my fingers along the rough wall and whispered, "They think I'm invisible. But this is mine. Not theirs. Not Atlas's. Mine." In that echoing emptiness, I realized I wasn't just building protection anymore. I was building power. Sophia grew sharper, more desperate. At a private dinner, she cornered me. "Emily, let's be honest," she hissed. "You're clinging to scraps. You don't belong at this table." I set my glass down, looked her dead in the eyes. "I'm not clinging to the table," I said softly. "I'm building the building it sits in." She blinked, confused, nervous, because deep down, she knew it was true. Months turned into a year. Atlas strutted on stages, David beamed for cameras, Sophia posed for magazines. And beneath it all, my empire grew. Invisible, unstoppable. Distribution, technology, compliance, property, data. Piece by piece, I controlled the skeleton of industries Atlas depended on. They thought they had silenced me. They thought I was done. But I had only just begun. One night, staring out at the city from my apartment, I whispered the oath that had been building inside me. I wasn't meant to sit quietly in their shadow. I wasn't meant to fetch scraps from their table. I was meant to own the ground beneath their feet. And as the city lights blinked back at me, I knew my hidden empire wasn't just a defense anymore. It was the future. There's a strange kind of silence that settles over a wedding. Not the quiet of reverence, but the hush of performance. Everyone is smiling, laughing, clinking glasses, yet beneath it there's a tension, a need for the illusion to hold. That's what I felt the moment I stepped into the grand ballroom on David and Sophia's wedding day. The hall glittered with chandeliers, each crystal dripping light like diamonds. White orchids floated above golden arches, candles shimmered in glass bowls, everything choreographed to scream wealth control perfection. Guests buzzed in laughter. Waiters weaved between tables carrying trays of champagne. A string quartet played soft, practiced notes that melted into the air like honey. And yet when I entered, it was as if the music dipped. Not because it stopped, but because I noticed the shift. Heads turned, then quickly turned away. Smiles froze, then reset. I wasn't welcome here. Not truly. I was tolerated. I walked toward the front, scanning the calligraphed seating chart. Names curled elegantly in black ink. Table 1, the bride and groom. Table 2, the parents of the bride and groom. Table 3, the bridal party. Table 4, 5, 6, family friends, old neighbors, teachers. My name wasn't there. I scanned again and again. Finally, the planner, clipboard in hand, approached with a too-tight smile. "Oh yes, Miss Collins. You're at table 14. Table 14, I repeated. "It's near the back," she chirped. "By the kitchen. By the kitchen." I nodded once, face calm, though inside the words carved deep. Table 14 was tucked beside swinging doors where servers rushed in and out, the smell of garlic and lamb wafting. The tablecloth was wrinkled, the silverware mismatched. 2 catering staff had been sitting there on break. As I approached, they scrambled up, embarrassed, mumbling apologies. Before I could respond, I heard it. Clear. Cold. Calculated. She doesn't run anything. Let her eat with the staff. Sophia's voice rang out like a bell. Smooth, icy, deliberate, loud enough for everyone to hear. Heads turned, a ripple of whispers. David stood beside her arm, linked with hers. He didn't correct her, didn't defend me. He just smirked. My mother fiddled with a flower arrangement. My father shoved his hands in his pockets. Silence from all of them. The silence hurt more than her words. My fingers itched. Calm, steady, I reached into my clutch. No trembling, no hesitation, just certainty. I dialed one number, one ring. Yes, cancel the contract. My voice was ice. A clipped reply. Understood. I hung up. The air shifted. Guests didn't know why yet, but they would. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I didn't beg for a seat at their table. I stood tall, smoothed my dress, and walked through the ballroom. Each step felt heavy, deliberate like a drumbeat. Servers froze. A spoon clattered to the floor. The wedding planner blinked. I didn't look back. I walked out the same way I had walked in unannounced, unnoticed. But this time, I carried their empire in my pocket. As I pushed through the doors, memories rushed me David getting a desk at Atlas while I begged for scraps. My father handing him business cards while telling me, "We'll call when we need you." My mother cutting me off mid-sentence at dinner. Sophia's email, "Once Emily signs, she's done." It all layered moment on moment until I wasn't just leaving a wedding. I was leaving behind years of erasure. Outside, the night air was sharp, almost cleansing. My heels clicked against marble as I walked to the waiting car. In my head, one thought pulsed steady. Karma doesn't always whisper. Sometimes she wears heels. Sometimes she carries receipts. And tonight, I was Karma. The driver glanced at me in the mirror. Where to Miss Collins, I smiled faintly. To the future. He blinked confused. But I leaned back exhaling, because I knew inside that ballroom the countdown had begun. Silence is louder than thunder when it falls in a crowded room. Back inside the ballroom, that silence spread like a stain. Guests glanced around, confused, sensing the shift, but not yet knowing the cause. It started small, a server whispering that his phone had buzzed with breaking news. Then another, and then it hit. David's phone lit up on the sweetheart table. Once, twice, again. He frowned, glancing down. His smirk faltered. Sophia leaned toward him, whispering sharply. "What is it?" He didn't answer. His fingers scrolled, eyes widening with each message. His wineglass trembled in his hand. Guests began murmuring, heads tilted, forks clinked nervously against plates. I wasn't there, but I can imagine it perfectly, because I had orchestrated it. On the screens of every banker, every investor, every guest tied to Atlas, the same headlines spread like wildfire: Fairchild Capital withdraws. Atlas merger collapses. $30 million gone. The Fairchild Group had pulled out minutes before the champagne toast. The perfect wedding had just been torpedoed. Sophia's polished facade shattered in real time. Her lips moved quickly, hissing questions into David's ear. Her smile collapsed, her diamond-studded mask slipping with every second. Guests whispered, some gasped, some smirked, because nothing feeds a wedding crowd like the scent of scandal. Her breathing quickened. Her hands shook. This wasn't the performance she had choreographed. David looked like a child caught in a lie. His face drained of color, jaw, clenched eyes darting as if searching for an escape hatch. This was his kingdom collapsing, his empire burning, his guests watching. Every ounce of confidence bled from him, leaving only panic. My mother's pearls trembled at her throat as she touched them, nervously scanning the room. My father's face reddened, his hands shoved deeper in his pockets, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The silence they had once weaponized against me now turned on them. They were frozen in their own shame. The crowd wasn't cruel, not openly, but their eyes. They whispered behind napkins. They leaned across tables. They sent messages under the tablecloth. Every empire falls twice, first in the markets, then in reputation. Tonight, David's was collapsing on both fronts. By dawn, Atlas stock would nosedive. Investors would scatter. Phones that once rang with congratulations would stay eerily silent. But in that ballroom, the collapse was already complete. Not because of numbers, because of humiliation. Some say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. It's best served calm. When my mother finally called me later that night, her voice trembled. "Emily, what have you done?" I let her words hang. Then, slow, sharp enough to cut, I answered, "Because you let me sit by the kitchen." Silence. Sweet, exquisite silence. Not confusion, recognition. She knew exactly what I meant. Every dismissal, every stolen credit, every time I was pushed aside until all that was left for me was a chair by the swinging doors. This was the bill coming due. David tried calling the next morning, again and again. His voicemails were frantic, angry, desperate. "Emily, you can't do this. We're family. Answer me. Please just talk to me." I didn't, because finally he was talking into silence. My silence. News spread through the city like veins of fire. Headlines blared, investors speculated, reporters circled like vultures. But me, I didn't gloat. I didn't parade. I walked the streets calm, composed, as though nothing had happened. Because this wasn't about spectacle. This was about power. Weeks later, I attended another wedding. Not David's, not Sophia's. Another family, another glittering hall, another performance. I stood on a balcony overlooking the courtyard, fairy lights strung like stars. Guests below laughed, sipped champagne, clinked glasses. It all looked the same. The masks, the theater, the illusion of perfection. And I realized weddings weren't beginnings. They were stages. Stages where families tried to sell an image while hiding the rot. But rot always shows. One evening, standing in my own office, my real office in a tower Atlas once dreamed of leasing, I looked out at the skyline. The city lights blinked back at me, a million silent witnesses. I thought of Sophia's smirk, David's panic, my mother's silence. And I whispered, steady, deliberate, I wasn't meant to sit in the kitchen. I was meant to own the building. The words landed heavy final. David would claw at the ruins, Sophia would scramble for footing, my parents would drown in regret. But me, I had already moved on. The empire I built wasn't born from shouting or begging for recognition. It was born from silence, patience, precision. They had mistaken my quiet for weakness. But silence, when wielded right, doesn't mean surrender. It means strike. From the kitchen table to the tallest tower, from whispers to headlines, the arc was complete. And if there was one truth I carried with me, it was this. Sometimes the best counterattack isn't in raising your voice. It's in waiting for the moment when silence can bring down an empire. There's always a silence after the storm. A different silence. Not the weighted, cruel silence of dismissal, but the hollow quiet that comes after you've burned the stage to the ground and the applause has faded. That was the silence that filled my life after the wedding. I woke the next morning in my apartment. For the first time in months, no emails demanding my attention. No voicemails from investors. No calendar screaming with meetings. Just stillness. I padded barefoot across the hardwood floor, the city skyline blinking at me through the glass. The air smelled faintly of coffee grounds and paper. I should have felt triumphant, victorious. But instead, there was an ache in my chest. Because revenge, when it lands, doesn't fill you. It empties you. I stood in front of the mirror staring at the woman reflected back. Sharp eyes, tired skin, shoulders squared but heavy. "Who are you now?" I whispered. The mirror didn't answer. It never does. But I saw it, the truth I didn't want to admit. I had won. Yes, I had crushed their empire with 3 words. But in the quiet aftermath, the question wasn't what did I destroy? It was what do I build now? In the days that followed, I thought of them often. My mother, pearls trembling. My father, silent, ashamed. David pale, clutching his phone like it could save him. Sophia, face cracking like porcelain under fire. I had replayed their dismissals so many times, they had become ghosts in my head. Ghosts whispering, "You'll never matter. You'll always be background." Sit at the kitchen table. For years I fought to silence them. And I had. But ghosts don't vanish when you win. Sometimes they haunt you louder. I tried to celebrate. I poured champagne one night, sat by the window, raised a glass to the city. "To survival," I muttered. But the bubbles tasted flat. Because what do you toast when the empire you toppled was built by your own blood? What do you celebrate when the people you proved wrong are the same ones who raised you? Victory over strangers is sweet. Victory over family is bitter. I started asking myself, what was the point? Did I want power? Yes. Did I want recognition? Absolutely. But beneath that deeper, what I wanted was to be seen. By them. And they never would. Not truly. Not anymore. That realization sat heavy like a stone in my chest. The city talked, of course. Articles dissected the collapse. Podcasts debated my role. Investors speculated. Some called me ruthless. Some called me brilliant. Some called me both. But none of their voices mattered. Because the one voice I had always wanted, the voice of my family speaking my name with pride, was silent. And maybe it always would be. I started walking at night. Through the city streets, past neon signs, past alleys that smelled of rain and cigarettes. Sometimes I'd stop at Atlas's headquarters, look up at the windows glowing late into the night. Inside, I imagined David pacing, Sophia whispering frantically, employees wondering if the ship would sink, and I would whisper to myself, "This was your doing. You lit the match." The words echoed in my chest. Triumph and guilt intertwined. One night, sitting on a park bench, I thought of my younger self. 8 years old. Sitting quiet at the dinner table, ignored, while David told stories that weren't funny, but made everyone laugh. I saw her little Emily's small hands folded in her lap, heart pounding with the desire to be heard. What would she think of me now? I asked aloud. Would she be proud or horrified? Would she see a survivor or a destroyer? The wind rustled the trees, but gave no answer. I lay on the floor one night, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, "You got what you wanted, so why do you feel emptier?" Tears burned my eyes unbidden, because the truth was I had built my identity around being overlooked, dismissed, erased. My power had come from proving them wrong. But now with them collapsed, what was I proving? Who was I without their shadow? When the storm passes, you're left with the wreckage, not just of what you destroyed, but of yourself. That's where I found myself in the weeks after the wedding. The silence was everywhere. In the mornings when I brewed coffee. In the afternoons when I sorted contracts for my hidden empire. At night when the city hummed, but my apartment stayed still. I had dreamed of this silence once. Dreamed of the day when no one could talk over me, when no one could dismiss me. But now that it was here, I realized silence can be freedom or it can be a cage. Mine was both. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror again. The same sharp eyes, the same squared shoulders, but something new, a question lingering in my reflection. Now what I had built a kingdom of shadows toppled an empire of illusions. But was that enough? The mirror seemed to whisper back, "You didn't fight all this time just to be empty." I started writing letters. To my mother, to my father, to David, not to send, just to bleed the words out. To my mother I wrote, "You silenced me not with words, but with absence. You looked away when I needed you most." To my father, you handed David cards with his name in bold, while telling me, "We'll call you when we need you." I waited years. You never did. To David, "You weren't the enemy. You were the golden boy handed a crown too heavy for you. I don't know if I hate you or pity you." I folded the letters and tucked them into a drawer. Sometimes healing isn't about being heard. It's about letting the words leave your chest. I dreamed often of that kitchen table. The real one from childhood. The wobbly chair, the chipped edges, the salt shaker my father always reached for instead of my words. In the dream, I was always seated there, silent, waiting. But one night, the dream shifted. I saw myself stand. I pushed the chair back, stepped away, and walked out the door. I woke up crying, because I realized I had been sitting at that table my entire life, even after I left it. And now, I finally wasn't. I returned to the park bench where I had once thought of my younger self. I closed my eyes, and there she was again, little Emily, sitting quietly waiting to be noticed. This time, I knelt beside her. "You don't need their laughter," I whispered. "You don't need their approval. You were never small. They just refused to see you." In my mind, she looked up. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, she smiled. My hidden empire kept growing. Contracts, partnerships, properties. The web tightened around Atlas without me even trying. But I began to see it differently. It wasn't just about power anymore. It wasn't just about proving I existed. It was about building something real. Something that didn't rely on revenge to breathe. Marcus's trucks kept people fed. Alondra's microloans saved single mothers. Ravi's compliance systems protected small businesses. These weren't just chess pieces against Atlas. They were lifelines. And maybe that was the meaning I had been searching for. One night, I whispered aloud, "You said you weren't meant to sit at the kitchen table. You said you were meant to own the building. But is owning enough?" The words hung in the air, because power without purpose is just another prison. And I had no intention of trading one prison for another. Weeks later, my mother came to my apartment. Her pearls were gone, her hair less perfect. She looked older than I remembered. We stood awkwardly in the doorway. Finally, she said, "Emily," why I wanted to rage, to list every slight, every silence, every humiliation. But instead, I said softly, "Because you never saw me." Her lips trembled. She had no reply, and for the first time, I didn't need one. I realized then the story was never about destroying Atlas, or humiliating David, or even silencing Sophia. The story was about me, about the girl at the kitchen table and the woman who walked away, about the power to turn silence from a weapon into a foundation, about finally writing my own script instead of playing the background role in theirs. Now, when silence fills my apartment, it feels different. Not hollow, not cruel. It feels like space, like possibility. The ghosts of their laughter have quieted. The child in me no longer waits to be called on. And when I look in the mirror, I don't see emptiness. I see a woman who survived, a woman who built, a woman who turned a kitchen chair into a tower.